Welcome back to the Cultural Curriculum Chat. I am so excited with who we have in the guest chair today. She is my heart-centered ball of sunshine friend. I was thinking over my morning coffee, I said, okay, Mrs. Diana Oestreich, she is equity, empathy, sunshine, and social justice peacemaker all wrapped in one person. And I'm so excited for you to meet her. I am just honored to have you with us today. Diana is a dear friend of mine, and we're going to talk about, what it's like having a multicultural family. They are an Ethiopian American family right here in the Northland in northern Minnesota, and, just bridging that gap of being that peacemaker and having those conversations that I really want our educators to know, especially our white educators when they are educating our Black and brown children in our classrooms. So welcome, Diana. So excited
thank
that you're
you
here.
so much for having me here, and everybody who's listening, you are getting a gem in Jeba. Every time she talks, I am making notes, and I'm like, yes. So if you ever get to see her in person, she'll give you the biggest hug and call you love. Yes. And if you get to learn from her, it's just a gift. So Jeba, thank you so much for educating us and bringing your whole self to this.
Oh, and thank you too. When Diana and I met, our sons are in high school and they were in a cross-country race, and our mutual friend introduced us. And it's like we knew each other from another life. It was just like, it was beyond the, hey, how's it going? We're just running this race. It's like, okay, let's get to it. Let's cut it. We're going to be friends for life. That's how it felt like when I met you. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So Diana, tell us a little bit about you, how you grew up, and your family.
Well, I grew up in a very small town. We definitely had more lakes than people and more pine trees than stoplights, a small community of 8,000. But what has been really significant for how I see where I grew up is there is an African-American scholar and professor from Minnesota. He teaches at McAllister. His name is Mahmoud El-Kati. Anyways, I heard him speak once, and he said, there's no such thing as race. And I'm a white lady, so I'm writing these down. I'm like, okay, And then he said, we can't come from whiteness. He said, we come from two places. We can come from a land, or we can come from a language. Wow. And that gave me a lens to look back at the people and the place where I grew up and the culture I grew up in. So I look back and I'm like, oh, I grew up in a small town, and the land was Ojibwe land. Mm-hmm. That's where I grew up. I grew up around 3 different reservations, very much influenced by the indigenous stewardship and mentality of why do we hunt and why do we do this? But the language that I grew up with was the language of whiteness. So even though the land was indigenous, the language that I was taught to speak and to see was definitely the language of white supremacy. I didn't even meet my very first indigenous person until I think I was in middle school. And it was a very embarrassing story with me and my younger sisters.
Wow.
But we were from the land, but we weren't trained or even told to see people who were leading us and were stewarding the land and were showing us how to take care of this place, because they were the original people who lived there. So that gave me a little bit of a lens. Sure, I liked where I grew up, but I also know I was told to see things, that there was really no such thing as racism because slavery was in the past, that indigenous folks weren't the people who should be our police officers and the people in the courthouse running the city. Why? Because they know how to take care of things. They were, in a different place because, there were just all these stereotypes that I look back and I'm like, that was the language I was taught from people I love, a place I love, but it was a self-supremacist language where we were what was right, and this is how we see things. And it wasn't until I went to basic training at 18 where you actually meet people from Brooklyn, the Hollers, Appalachia. Like, you meet people and you're like, oh, I am just one tiny fish in a big pool. And you don't even know that until you meet people from all across the nation. And that's when you find out, like, oh, it's just my teeny tiny culture that we do it this way. Yeah, when I went to basic training and met, 500 people from all across the land who we all had different idea, different faith, different this, different, like, some people were like, I don't wear socks. And they're like, we got to wear socks, just coming together is where I first saw where I came from through a different lens.
Wow. And I feel like what you're saying too with Professor Mahmoud is that woke you up to say what you thought was one way and this is how things are, this is how they should be. And he disrupted that mentality in you. And I feel like when we're talking about, anti-racist work, especially in education, you will get that disruption. And what you do with that disruption is either you put your defenses up and go, that's how it's going to be. I'm going to do this in my classroom because I've always done it. And, I started it this time. But I love that when you said that was a catalyst for you to see the land and the language. That's very, very powerful.
And the people that were erased from the story.
Yes, the people that were erased. Yes.
When you have that majority culture, then you get to say what is, and your stories dominate. And so it was really powerful for me to be able to reconnect to the folks that I had really been taught not to see and not to count and not to value.
Wow, that's powerful, because I feel that too, especially with education nowadays, that we're trying to see what is the priority of who to see, who to push back. And a lot of groups from that disenfranchisement and marginalized communities are like, we've been here. And a lot in the show, I've always said, we exist. We have been here. And when we do meet with each other as a community, I think educators need to be disruptive to say, yes, we have all of these children in walks of life that you might not know their identity by face value, but you also have to teach that they are there and that they still exist. And that's the disconnect I see with some educators trying to figure that out. So when you're talking about, this, disconnection and the erasure, a lot of that comes to that white supremacist ideals of this is the curriculum that we're given. And a lot of educators that I know in my tenure when I was in the classroom was there were teachers that wanted to disrupt and dispel a lot of those myths and would take resources from other places to supplement, what was given to them. And what's your advice to those educators that are trying to reach and find those resources to make sure it's balanced in the whole picture for their students?
One of the best resources that I think has been helpful to me is the internet. When you follow a different educator, so if you're a rural educator, follow an educator from the city. If you are from the city, follow an educator from tribal lands. Like, if you're an educator up north, find somebody who is down south, because when you get to hear from what they're teaching, how they're teaching it, and then you borrow, you get to see what they're talking about. And then you can use that resource. You don't have to create the wheel. The wheel, like you said, Jeb, everybody's already here. It's just that we oftentimes are not in the same room together. And so one example of this is a while ago, they came out that Harriet Tubman was going to be honored by being on the $20 bill. Mm-hmm. And I thought, from my small cultural experience and the 20 people I know, I was like, oh, well, that sounds great. But because I follow different folks in the African American community, I heard they were like, this is an abomination to Harriet Tubman. Her whole life was about refusing to allow people to be enslaved and sold for money. So to put her face on money, that is not the way to honor Harriet Tubman. And I was like, oh,
wow.
And so whether you agree or not, if I was an educator, actually, I think we're all educators when we speak up in our daily life. So as I went about my day and my life, I would bring this up and be like, hey, did you hear about? People like, yeah, that's great. I was like, well, did you also hear that, people think that to honor her would look this way. This is dishonoring to her. So whether you do or not, I now had that two perspectives to bring into my own life and my own education and to my kids around the dinner table.
Yes. Tell me more, about your two sons. They are just a joy. And Diana has a son adopted from Ethiopia, and her son, Bridger, as well, is American. What are your dinner conversations like? I love your bio and you're like, yeah, you have really fun, bad jokes and you're competitive with card games, but yeah, how is that dynamic?
I think that my sons have been they're swoony. They make me weak in the knees. I think they're just like the cat's meow. I'm always like, oh man, look at them.
Boy, mom, we get it. Yeah.
Right? And at the same time, when most kids are going to kindergarten, that it's usually a really exciting time for families, and it's usually really sweet. Your sweet little person leaves your house. Now they're going to kindergarten. You're like, oh my gosh. And for us, it was a heartbreaking time because before they went to school, I would oftentimes, they're barely a year apart. And so I started dressing them the same. So I buy 2 t-shirts because I didn't want my younger son to hear as he was growing up at the playground, oh, are you your brother's friend? People would oftentimes, when I'd have 2 babies in a stroller, they would ask me if this was a friend. And I was flabbergasted. I was like, I don't get this. But I was aware that other people making that comment repetitively over my sweet little son as he grows up, that wasn't okay with me. No. And so I started buying them matching t-shirts because sons don't do that. So he would stop hearing that at the playground and we went out. But when he went to kindergarten, he was in this cute little school. It had a greenhouse, so we just kind of assumed it was just going to be great, right? Mm-hmm. And it didn't even take 6 weeks until a kid on the playground called him the N-word. Mm-hmm. And also made fun of his older brother for, I quote, having a blackie for a brother. Oh. So it's supposed to be this really beautiful time where your 2 kids are just going to elementary school, getting on the yellow bus together and blocks and crayons, and our conversations around our dinner table and when they got off the bus that day were heartbreaking. And it was so much bigger than them. But I'll tell you, Jeb, souls know when they are being put in a place of less. You might not understand the historical significance, but there is something powerful about that word. And it's different than being called a big ugly jerk face.
Oh yeah. Doesn't carry any kind of weight like that.
First time. So those are the conversations that we're having of, one son us needing to somehow walk him through and protect and restore and make his personality and his soul resilient, that says that's not about you, that's about them. And my older son to say, hey, you are always going to be standing up for your brother, and you are always going to be going to bat for him, and he always has, like he's carried something on a little first grader's shoulders that not many kids do. And my little kindergarten carried something home from him on the bus that not many kids do. So when I look at adults or educators, I'm like, listen, pony up, because they need you. Like, they need you to speak up, and they need you to say it's not okay. Like racism, always been there. You just need to face it. Just don't erase it, because you're erasing the value of our kids. And so what I most would tell educators, what I most could have used during those years, because it happened basically every year, and as parents, is to acknowledge it. Because I remember telling another mom at school, we were waiting to pick her up, what had happened, and she's like, well, I said, it's been really hard for my son to be here. And she was like, oh, well, I don't think that kids see color. As I'm looking at her daughter next to her wearing head to toe pink. And so I was like, oh, you don't think they have a preference for color right now? Like, why does one thing make sense, but the minute it makes them uncomfortable and they have to face something in their school, now kids don't love purple and pink and have a preference. Like, come on now. So exactly. I think what could have been really helpful is if the teachers would have just acknowledged it and then asked, what can we do for your child? Like, I'm not super into the punishment system. Like, obviously a kid who's doing that stuff, it's been handed down to them from their family. Like, I'm not going to change a family system who thinks that saying those words are okay. But we can make sure our kids are valued and they know that they're normal in the classroom and that behavior from that other kid is not.
Yes,
I think we have to create a community of identity that says we treat our classmates with love and respect. We say that, and you're part of the we. So come over here and leave those words outside.
Yes. Oh, I mean, it is. You feel it, and I feel like I'm tearing up, because when you, as a child, you never forget what you wore. You never forget what happened to you on the playground, and it sticks with you. And I commend you for, how you and your husband raise your children to know we protect each other no matter what. We go to bat for each other no matter what. But telling your Ethiopian son that you see him and you didn't diminish him, even in kindergarten, to the point of saying, oh, that's how it is. You're like, no, that's not okay. I see you. I love you. And when we talk about families and how families come from all walks of life, it pains you when someone looks at your two beautiful children and go, oh, is that his friend? Like, in the stroller. Like, you think we just hanging out for buddies. There's no Uber for friends, especially in the stroller. You know what I mean? So it's like, come on. And the fact that you had to dress your children up in twin shirts so they could know that they're siblings. That's not too long ago. And how people still would get shocked when I would share that type of story with my two biracial kids, and I was called the nanny so many times at the playground. Like, no, I'm not just here babysitting. Like, this is my child. So I feel that when you share that with our audience, thank you for that, because it's so vulnerable to share. And I know things bring up when you say those words. So thank you for being open and honest with us. But as educators, this is not an anomaly. We have our kids of all walks of life on that same playground, kindergarten, 9th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, that are coming home with their moms, eyes crying, tears of what happened to them. And as a parent, I understand and I feel how frustrating it can be when you step up and advocate for your child that harm has been done. And the first thing that teacher would say is, "Oh, are you sure? Or why didn't they come to me first?" And I'm saying, as a parent of a kid of color, and I know you understand this, it's gotten to that point where your child has been saying it. Your child has gone to the adult. Your child has told a friend. Now they've checked all those boxes of what the procedures are supposed to be. Now they come to the parent, and the parent is now that mama bear, the papa bear, saying, "No, this is go time. My kid has done all the things that you said that was in our handbook to say. And now I'm coming to you as the adult. You need to see me as the adult to say, what can we do to, make this behavior no longer welcomed?" When we say we tolerate, I feel like it still gives that, supremacist a pass. Like, okay, you won't tolerate it in this space, so you can tolerate it here, right? Or you can tolerate it here. And so when you say it's not welcome here, and as that parent to say, I'm standing up for my child because nobody else is going to, we need to say, wow, I hear you loud and clear, Diana. What can we do to make it right? So your child feels that they're valued and that they're safe and that they are respected. That I think is very powerful. Another thing I really want you to, and thank you for sharing those tips of acknowledging when harm has been done. I really love seeing your work. Friends, if you haven't seen Diana, she is just peacemaker, social activist, and just all around really, stepping up and having those uncomfortable conversations with folks. I really want us to understand when we are talking about it, you're going to be uncomfortable. I always say in my work, you got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I love, Diana, how you have those uncomfortable conversations with folks where you talk from your intention and with heart. Can you give us a good example of when we are talking about race and racism, in education or even in the community? How do you have those uncomfortable conversations with folks?
I think there's so many different ways to do it. But the most powerful one, if you remember nothing from this podcast, just please write this down, put this in your pocket, don't do anything else I say, just this one thing. And the most powerful thing you can ever do when you see something is say, "Hey, stop that." We know from the research, all the anti-bullying research that like all the elementary schools were doing, that like 90% of bullying moments end within 60 seconds if a single bystander, a single person will go from silent to uttering those 3 words. Those are not courageous words. Those are not fighting words. Those are not anything. But what those words do, and when we have the courage to go from bystander, which is like, oh, I don't exactly know what is right or wrong, but I know something right now. I know that this person is being demeaned. I know that there's something wrong happening to this human being next to me. Even though, I'm not an expert, I just know that I would never want someone to do this to me or say this to me. So what happens is when we acknowledge something instead of avoiding it, I feel like that is the game changer. That is the entrance to the conversation. That is number one. I think the most powerful thing is when somebody knows that somebody is willing to step in and say, that's not okay. Because as a victim, the worst thing is not that somebody is doing something awful. It's all the people not saying anything. That's what is really demoralizing. That is what is more painful. That is what feels like you aren't worthy, that you don't belong, because somebody is letting you get thrown under the bus. So I think the number one thing you can always remember is going from silent to saying something. Because when we address that this isn't okay. And whether it's because it's racist or because it's violent, like all of the ways that this is wrong, if we don't have a start line, then we'll never get to the finish line. So the start line is that we commit when I see something racist or I see something unjust, I will say something, whether it's my friend, whether it's a fellow educator, because I'm telling you, Jeb, the stuff that people say out loud, they are saying with their friends in the break room on blast. So the most powerful thing you can do is just commit to when you see something, you will say, I will say those 3 words no matter what, no matter how scared I am, no matter if I think I'm going to get blowback, no matter if like whatever, because that's what restores the hope of the person who is being treated that way. That's how they kind of know they're worthy of somebody saying something.
Yes. And that you have their back. You don't have to know them from Adam, but just when you said, hey, stop that. I mean, even with a child, like they jump like, oh, what, that's the thing that turns it to that person going, wow, thank you. Thank you.
And you
for
can
saying something and acknowledging that harm has been done.
You can have the conversation next, or you can just keep walking down the grocery aisle. But I remember hearing a whole bunch of extremely loud white men in a coffee shop, and they were saying the worst, demeaning, racist things so loud. And I was like, you know what? If I could be a 90-year-old grandma with a big purse that walks by and says, shame on you, stop that. I would have done it. But I was too scared to say something that day because I was worried that they would like yell at me because there's like 6 of them and 1 of me. But I also thought if I had the guts to say, hey, stop that in front of the whole coffee shop, I know they would think twice the next time they said these things in public. They'd kind of be like, oh man, kind of sucked last time somebody called me out. Like, so the power of if I would have said something, I know they would have thought twice about doing it again, So
yes, I love that. I love that. And it's simple. You don't even need to practice it because when people are comfortable to be microaggressive, slinging all kinds of vitriol, they are comfortable no matter where they are. And like you said, behind closed doors, they're even louder. So when you get up there and just, even if your voice shakes, it's just, hey, stop that. Oh, gold. Now tell us,
when we say something, I'm always really nervous to say it, but like there's something in me because I was a soldier and I saw violence. So I'm like, man, this stuff is real and it's there and it's violent. It's violence against our bodies, our souls. Violence is the enemy. People are our sacred responsibility. So no matter what, I oftentimes feel like I have to say something, but when I do, I typically am nervous. And I am like, oh my gosh, people are going to yell at me and be mad at me on social media. But I also find that other people say, thank you. Like, I was thinking it too, but I didn't know why nobody was saying this wasn't okay. And so when one person says, hey, stop that, it emboldens everybody else to know, yes, I knew it. And like that was racist, it wasn't okay, and somebody says something, now it confirms, yes, I know it when I see it, and I know it's not okay. So it empowers the next person to step up and own their responsibility as a community member to say something.
That's it. The responsibility as a community member to say something. Because we've been in spaces where I've been a target of hateful things and nobody said anything. And some of them, a lot of them were friends and acquaintances. It's like, wow, now I really see you. Because when somebody is capable of a stranger, or even a friend, an acquaintance that said something, and you don't step up and say, hey, stop that, or, oh, that made me uncomfortable, I can only imagine how Jebeh felt. That's when I see you. We're not just friends, we're friendly. Because that friend card is gone. It's diminished because when I really needed you to help out and speak up, because I always say to folks, even, when I'm doing trainings or educating, other teachers, is I can save myself. So that whole, I don't want to be a white savior is just an excuse. But to say, hey, stop that, that's a person who's got my back. That's a person that looks at me and goes, you got this, Jeb? And I'll say, you know what? Thank you. I do have this. But you know what? Thank you for saying something too. And then I will take action of how I feel most comfortable. And maybe that action is, Diana, okay, let's get out of this coffee shop because they're not making me feel safe either. Or it's like, okay, Diana, and another thing, I got my purse. Let's hold it up and go, okay. I will take that latte to go and I will not patronize here anymore, because if you are allowing that space to have people to feel comfortable and confident to to spread this vitriol, I don't feel culturally safe in that place anymore. I won't go. And I will tell my friends, don't go there. Even if you don't look like me, to say, yeah, this is not a vibe that I want to patronize anymore. Oh, I love this. So Diana, yes, I have to tell you and my guests, yes, Diana is a combat Iraq veteran, and she is on a mission, y'all, to wage peace of all walks of life. And I bought her memoir, Waging Peace, and I tell you, I read it, I cried, I dog-eared it. It's just so good of walking you through her memories of the Iraq War as a young, early 20s soldier, just graduated from college. We're the same age. And in what I love about your book, and I want you to, give us a little taste. I always say, give us a sizzle, not the steak, because I want people to buy this book, is how you interpersonally met with these Iraq women, and not knowing the language and the barrier, but having that deep cross-cultural connection I want us all to have. So share us a little bit about your book and your Waging Peace project. Yes.
So I will tell people that most people read it in like 2 or 3 days because they just have to find out what happens next. So I will tell you, read this book, because the most powerful thing about my experience and getting to share it is that when you come from a majority culture, which we all do, like if you come from your family, everybody's telling you what we think and what we think the world should be, and who is somebody who we want to be more like, and who are people who we distrust, that, we don't really want them to go to school with our kids, or we don't really want them to be in the neighborhood. So I think the most powerful thing is at 23, which we all know you're a baby at 23, like any beliefs you have has been handed to you, but you really haven't had any experience yourself or to test these things. So I went in the war with all these beliefs, a lot of majority culture, God, guns, and country, and then I get there and all of a sudden I see the people at the other end of my gun, and I'm like, oh, like in a minute, and you'll have to read how these major transformations and epic cliffhangers happen. But what happened was I saw the person at the other end of my gun, and I was like, oh, wait a second. Like, when you have those moments where you're like, I don't know how, but like God just kind of gives you the thing that was always true, that was right in front of your face that you could never see. But I was like, oh, like, we're part of the same team. I was like, this person, she wants to stay alive just like me. She has kids. She wants to get home. And we're connected with this family of 8 billion. And I saw a woman who chose to trust me before I trusted her. And she chose to live this wild, dangerous love and connection, even on a battlefield. Like, it is not courageous. Everybody has a gun, everyone's shooting everybody. Like, this is not a courageous thing to do. But what this woman did changed my world. Like, changed my world. And I realized, I was like, she is braver than anybody I know. She is living out loud in a place that tries to scare you to giving away your soul by doing violence. And so all of a sudden, I thought I was one person. And all of a sudden, I see this woman and she like welcomes me into her home, acts like my life is just as valuable as hers and her kids. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, I had been handed these things, but this wasn't who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I knew, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a soldier, but I am built to be a peacemaker.
Yeah.
And so ever since then, it gave me this permission to include everybody in my jurisdiction to love. So all the people that I've been kind of brought up and my faith told me like not to notice, if they have problems, it's their problem. And all of a sudden, everybody, if they raised their hand and said, hey, we need help, or hey, violence is done, I was like, I'm there. 2 kids, graham crackers, juice box, we're there. And so I started meeting all these people who before just weren't, like I really couldn't see them because I wasn't told to value their pain or their concerns or even like their experience, or their kids. And so now everybody's in my jurisdiction to love. And now I knew that building up the world was the best thing I could ever teach my kids.
Wow. That's the legacy there.
That's the power of them. Like, if you determine that you're going to have the freedom not to harm another person, I'm like, no matter what, I'm like, that's the freedom that people ultimately think we're fighting wars for. Like, that is a soul freedom you'll never get. And so I started bringing my kids in the community, and they started finding out not to be scared about the tragedies, the shootings, the this, the that, but they found that community always shows up for each other. That we light candles, that we step towards each other. And that's what showed them that they are part of our community, that we're like, we need them to show up, and that they can count on us. That they're builders and not breakers. And I think that that is then the most powerful thing and the thing that gives me joy. So I created this local project called the Waging Peace Project, where we activate justice and instigate joy by committing acts of courage right where we live. So this can be small, this can be big, but I realized like we are all meant to like live out our purpose and our joy, and it's all connected to peace. So it's been an incredible gift to get to do. And I hear stories from people all across the country who are joining in or inviting me to speak here, or we go to schools, we do like all over the place. I think people are starved to get an invitation to do something positive.
Yes, that's it. And I am so happy that you are leading the charge, hon, with your positivity, because I tell you, how you craft it in, it's simple. It's in your own community or worldwide or whatever you see fit. But that human to human connection, I love that. Builders and not breakers. That's all what we're meant to be here for. And thank you. And where can they find your work? Because y'all, she is an author and a podcaster too, and a keynote speaker and all the things. I mean, like, I'm just hanging on to your tale of greatness because you are just going to shine in your work of activism.
I've gotten to team up with Dr. Bernice King with the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta this year, and I've gotten to team up with groups in Appalachia who want to learn about social justice. I've gotten to just be part of things that I think always fill me with hope. And so follow me at Instagram, it's Diana Oestreich, but I'm always offering people one practical local way that you can show up, and then one global thing. Because I think that action is the antidote to despair. So especially right now, we need to know that our hearts are breaking for the big things happening. And for our own sake, I think we need to take one action in our community so that we can hold on to our hope. And it also shows that kids are resilient when we give them actions during chaotic, hard times. So follow me on Instagram so you'll get, but also go to my website, dianaoestreich.com, and I send out once a month a practical newsletter dripping with hope. So there'll be stories of hope, and then there'll be 1 or 2 action steps. And as always, there's a podcast where I find some peacemakers in wild places, like a poet from Brooklyn or a rapper from LA or a mom from Indiana, but I'm like, they are totally waging peace in their own way. And I think when we get to notice those stories, that's what shows us and connects us to this multicultural community that
Yes.
make us more alive and
I
more
love it.
connected.
And your show is so chef's kiss because I'm just sitting there hanging on every word of your guests and you two talking, and I'm just so proud of you, and I'm so blessed and honored to have you as a friend. She does, you fill my cup, anytime I need inspiration, it's Diana. And I do, girl, I read your book twice. I'm just like, in how you write, like I said, you get enveloped with your story and you see these transformations in the people that you encounter, and it's so powerful. And I just know 23-year-old Diana is proud of, affordable Diana, because I know we're the same age. We don't need to put it out there. But yes, we're just so proud. And thank you for coming on the show with all of your gems and wisdom. And I love your strategies of sharing who you are and your lived experience as a mom, a combat vet. Thank you again for your service and continuing to serve our community and our nation with your peace activism. Like I said, I'm so happy that you're on my show.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much for letting me come and be with your listeners today. And thank you for educating. I think it always takes one person to stand up there and say, guys, we can do it better. Join me. So I have loved getting to learn from you. I'm grateful that you are advocating in our community so that our kids in school are going to leave with healthier communities and less harm. And also because I do have, a white son and a black son, I'm like, I work for peace and justice and anti-racism because it is what my white son needs to be equipped with so that he can be a builder, and it's also what my black son needs. So they're not two separate ends of the coin. I'm like, no, this is what we both need to be healthy and to be justice makers and fully alive. So I think it's equally valuable to your family if you're a white majority culture family, or if you're a family that is multiracial. I'm like, it is just as important for your kids to be part of this, for their mental health, for their resiliency, for their identity. Like, equip them and they will fly.
Yes, that is so important. And every dinner table needs to have these conversations, not just our families, but all families. And thank you for reiterating that, Diana. And I will have Diana's in all of her information, where you can find her book, where you can follow her, and her website in the show notes. And thanks again, listeners, fellow educators, and community members, for listening to the Cultural Curriculum Chat. I'll see you here same time next week. Bye-bye.